Good evening. I welcome you to this Monday cardiac anesthesia critical care webinar, which we do on Mondays. Thank you for joining us. This is being done under the auspices of Forum of Cardiac Anesthesiologists. May I request Anup Varghese to take over and conduct the meeting?
Yes, thank you, sir. And good evening, everyone, and a warm welcome to all on behalf of the Forum of Cardiac Anesthesia, and to another, hopefully another enterprising and exciting episode, where we will be discussing about the recent advances or recent changes that are happening in the field of cardiac anesthesia. So, when we analyze the progress of cardiac anesthesia over the last 20 years or so, it has progressed quite dramatically and very fast, in fact. If you look at the early 60s, the early days of CABG, patients usually presented for cardiac surgery as an option of last resort. They were usually in terminal cardiac failure, and after all other options have been exercised, that's when they used to present for cardiac surgery. So, and that time, the anesthesia was usually given with thiopental and halothane. It was very hazardous period at that time. But those days are long gone, and now the field has progressed from the high days of high dose opioid anesthesia that entailed giving obligatory post-op mechanical ventilation due to the prolonged respiratory depression of those agents that was used. So from those days, we have come over to days where we using the doses of opioids were gradually reduced, and as the number of cardiac cases went up, there was an impetus to reduce the number of days that the patient stayed in the ICU. That's how the concept of fast tracking in cardiac anesthesia came about. So, clinicians have been exploring options by which you can cut down on the stay in the ICU, and what are the means or what are the methods or by which you can give a safe anesthesia for the patient, a safe post-operative care without compromising on morbidity or mortality, and at the same time, and also targeting an optimum outcome for the patient, but at the same time reducing the stay the period of stay in the ICU. So in today's session, Dr. Saujanya will explore what are the recent advances in the field of fast track in with relation to cardiac anesthesia. So with this, I invite Dr. Saujanya. Saujanya, can you enlighten us about what are the recent advances in the field of fast tracking with relation to cardiac anesthesia?
Yes, sir. Good evening, everyone. Today I'm going to discuss about enhanced recovery after cardiac surgery, which is one of the recent topic of interest. Shall I start, sir?
Yes, please.
So today our topic of discussion is enhanced recovery after cardiac surgery. This is also popularly called as fast tracking. The main concept behind this enhanced recovery after cardiac surgery is to mainly prevent the postoperative complications, prolonged postoperative ICU stay, so that we can extubate the patients early, and we can improve the post-operative mortality and morbidity along with the post-operative ICU stay and the need for mechanical ventilation and other inotropic support. So let us have a look on the enhanced recovery after cardiac surgery. So this is an international effort to develop the perioperative programs which are aimed to optimize the patient outcomes and healthcare delivery system efficiently. So these programs are mainly composed of many interventional bundles. So these bundles are based on the best practices that have been published recently, which are standardized and which are consistent with present healthcare delivery system. And these are being regularly going to audit so that we can continuously correct ourselves and along with the team feedback. So the Society for Enhanced Recovery After Cardiac Surgery, they have recently published an article putting some of the guidelines for perioperative care, mainly in the field of cardiac surgery. And these guidelines are purely based on the systematic review and meta-analysis and multidisciplinary consensus. So, several recommendations were graded according to the currently accepted standards, and these are graded according to the level of evidence and confidence of recommendation. So, the first recommendation is a care bundle of evidence which is based on best practices to reduce the surgical site infections. So, as we all know, the reported incidence of deep sternal wound infection ranges between 0.8% to 6%, and it is associated with definitely prolonged hospital stay postoperatively, long-term antibiotic therapy, repeated surgical procedures, which directly lead to higher mortality and morbidity and higher healthcare costs. So, mainly the predisposing factors which are known to be associated causing these sternal wound infections include patient factors, surgical factors, some of which are modifiable and some of which are non-modifiable. So, enhanced recovery after cardiac surgery mainly focuses on the modifiable risk factors so that which we can manipulate them so as to come down on the incidence of surgical site infections. So the predisposing factors mainly are obesity, diabetes, coronary artery disease, low ejection fraction, if the patient is already on chronic steroid therapy, previous chronic infections, end-stage renal disease, history of chronic smoking, and advanced age. So the surgical factors that are believed to contribute to the development of sternal wound infections include inadequate skin preparation, use of bone wax. Emergency surgeries have seen an increased incidence of wound infections postoperatively, bilateral harvesting of internal mammary artery, excessive blood product transfusions, prolonged bypass or surgical time, sternal rewiring, and postoperative bleeding. So mainly our efforts should be focused on addressing the modifiable risk factors perioperatively. Some of these include perioperative management of glucose levels and enhanced nutritional support. So many recent articles have focused on enhancing the nutritional support pre-operatively also in cardiac surgical patients, mainly to come down on post-operative sternal wound infections. And ensuring that the patient receives the appropriate antibiotics within the optimal window. And the second recommendation is goal-directed fluid therapy. Goal-directed fluid therapy, it is an algorithmic approach which is guided by specialized monitoring devices so as to individualize the use of IV fluids, use of vasopressors and inotropes, each specific to specific patient, so as to achieve the hemodynamic goals, thereby optimizing the oxygen delivery as well as organ perfusion, and on the other hand, not to overload the patient. So, Many indicators have been utilized to carry out this goal-directed fluid therapy nowadays. So mainly we focus on dynamic indicators of fluid responsiveness perioperatively in a cardiac patient. These include pulse pressure variation, stroke volume variation, IVC collapsibility, etc. So these indices should be individualized to every single patient, and every single patient should be treated separately in the respect of vasopressors, inotropes, and IV fluids. So another recommendation is perioperative multimodal opioid sparing pain management plan. So areas of investigation are to refine postoperative pain management, which include the following: managing the patient and provider expectations, individualizing the dose and type of analgesics to be used based on the patient comorbid conditions and age, consideration of potential cardioprotective effects of opioids, and incorporating non-pharmacological approaches to pain management such as regional anesthesia. Some of the regional anesthesia techniques which they have been following in the postoperative pain management include thoracic epidural analgesia, thoracic paravertebral blocks, parasternal intercostal blocks, and erector spinae blocks, pectoralis blocks, etc. Another recommendation is avoidance of persistent hypothermia after cardiopulmonary bypass in the early postoperative period. So prolonged postoperative hypothermia, it has been associated with increased mortality and morbidity after cardiac surgery. It has additional complications also, such as increased risk of infections, as we have discussed, bleeding, and the length of hospitalization. So the best way to prevent postoperative hypothermia is to maintain intraoperative euthermia. But this is a contradictory statement in case of cardiac surgery, because here there is requirement of deliberate hypothermia during the cardiopulmonary bypass and even the deep hypothermic circulatory arrest to provide neuroprotection for certain procedures. Rewarming has also the potential for harm if performed too quickly or if hypothermia occurs, which has been associated with increased postoperative cognitive functions, neurological deficits, infection, and renal dysfunction. So furthermore, research and standardization of optimal temperature sites will assist the clinicians to accurately measure the regional and systemic temperatures, improve the ability to prevent hyperthermia during rewarming, and predict the temperature after drop in the postoperative period. So the next recommendation is postoperative systemic delirium screening tool to be used at least once per nursing shift in the postoperative period. Delirium is the common complication in the postoperative period in the cardiac surgical patients. It increases the complication rates, duration of mechanical ventilation, ICU stay, mortality, morbidity, and has been associated with long-term cognitive changes, which are permanent. So standardized and consistent identification of its presence is an important first step in the management of delirium. So the risk of developing delirium postoperatively should be predicted preoperatively only and should be individualized to each patient. So there are multiple factors which predict the development of delirium postoperatively. These include frailty, genetics, lifestyle of the patient, underlying diseases, drug therapy, surgical trauma, and anesthesia management, which include the use of benzodiazepines, venous congestion, pain management. So the data are emerging regarding the use of alpha-2 adrenergic agonists like dexmedetomidine, non-pharmacological strategies to prevent delirium, which include early mobilization of the patient, adequate postoperative pain management, minimization and targeted titration of sedation, avoidance of benzodiazepines and other restraints, and patient reorientation postoperatively, cognitive stimulation, reduction of hearing or other visual impairment. By standardizing this delirium screening tool, cardiac centers will provide invaluable information to assist in future studies which are required to identify high quality interventions to avoid a complication based on this, so that we can improve the quality of the patient's care and recovery. So the next recommendation is early detection of kidney stress and interventions to avoid acute kidney injury after cardiac surgery. So depending on the complexity of the procedure and definition of the acute kidney injury chosen, the reported incidence varies between 22 to 36%. Severe acute kidney injury requiring renal replacement therapy after cardiac surgery occurs in 2 to 5% of surgical patients, and this includes a mortality up to 50 to 80%. So recent advances in early detection of kidney injury post-operatively include use of urinary biomarkers such as insulin-like growth factor binding protein 7 and tissue inhibitor of metalloproteinases 2 that can detect stress or injury without requiring concurrent loss of kidney function. The next recommendation is prehabilitation for patients undergoing elective cardiac surgery with multiple comorbidities or significant deconditioning. So, cardiac prehabilitation or prehab includes a number of initiatives. So, this recommendation mainly focuses on preoperative optimization of the cardiac surgical patient to avoid postoperative complications. These mainly include aerobic exercise training, respiratory muscle training, smoking cessation, decreased alcohol consumption, improving the sleep patterns, weight control, optimization of medical comorbidities, and psychosocial assessment and education. So, the primary goal of prehab is to reduce both the incidence and severity of postoperative complications. These can be mainly carried out if the patient is coming for an elective cardiac surgery, but this is contraindicatory statement in emergency cardiac surgery, as we cannot perform prehab in an emergency situation. In selected patients awaiting for cardiac surgery, there has to be a structured physical activity program designed to improve preoperative aerobic capacity and may lead to decrease in the postoperative complications and hospital length of stay. So, optimal duration of this rehabilitation program should be determined by the best compromise between compliance and effectiveness. 2 to 4 weeks seems to be ineffective, but whereas exceeding a 3-month duration is associated with poor compliance. A prehab course lasting between 6 to 8 weeks that is focused on 3 key areas such as preoperative physical exercise, nutrition, and psychological support appears to be a good compromise between feasibility and effectiveness. Another recommendation is strategies to ensure extubation within 6 hours of surgery. The origin of fast track paradigm began with replacing the standard use of high dose opioids, meant to enhance hemodynamic stability with a more balanced approach to anesthesia using lower doses of opioids, shorter acting hypnotics, earlier extubation, and encouraging regional blocks which are opioid sparing. Reintubation results in increased hospital mortality. Therefore, it is important to stratify cardiac surgical patients to maximize the success of fast track pathway. To this purpose, many scoring systems have been proposed, and simple clinical metrics such as close clamp time, postoperative hypothermia, and inotrope use have been directly related to successful early extubation. Another recommendation is preoperative correction of nutritional deficiency whenever it is feasible. Optimizing perioperative nutrition has the potential to improve a wide range of patient outcomes, such as less surgical site infection, improved wound healing, reduced mechanical ventilation times, shorter ICU stay, lesser hospital readmission, and lower mortality. Preoperative malnutrition is associated with increased pro-inflammatory and immune suppressive response to surgical stress. So the patients are more prone to develop sternal wound infections, postoperative prolonged dependency on mechanical ventilation, and higher incidence of end organ dysfunction. So this area has been an attractive target for patient optimization preoperatively. So patient factors such as age, underlying comorbidities, nutritional status, and muscle mass have an effect on the physical functioning of the patients after cardiac surgery. Another unanswered question involves the time and duration of nutritional correction relative to the upcoming cardiac surgery. Literature in non-cardiac surgical population suggests that an effective duration of preoperative support is 4 to 14 days, a time frame that may not be possible in many cardiac surgery patients. So nutritional support, especially enteral nutrition, often is withheld early in the postoperative phase of care because of the concerns for paralytic ileus, gut ischemia or reperfusion injury, vasopressor support, or hemodynamic instability. Despite guidelines suggesting only the hemodynamic instability is a justified reason to withhold enteral nutrition. So, to meet the nutritional needs of postoperative cardiac surgical patients, we have to combine both enteral and parenteral nutrition, which has been viewed as a promising strategy. So, the recommendation is continued consumption of clear liquids until 2 to 4 hours before the general anesthesia. So data respective to this recommendation in support to cardiac surgery is lacking and include only a few trials devoted to the subject. Patient pathology, particularly concomitant diabetes, theoretically may contribute to increased risk of delayed gastric emptying. In addition, this topic generally is unstudied in the setup of transesophageal echocardiography, which may contribute to the risk of aspiration. Another recommendation states preoperative oral carbohydrate loading may be considered before surgery. So, regardless of one's willingness to liberate the traditional NPO guidelines, the provision of carbohydrate load in cardiac surgery is an ERAS cardiac recommendation that warrants further discussion and studies. There are convincing data to support the oral administration of 25 to 50 grams of carbohydrate load before non-cardiac surgery as a means to reduce insulin resistance and perioperative hypoglycemia, thereby enhancing the return of gastrointestinal function and improve patient satisfaction postoperatively. But given the importance to tight glycemic control in cardiac surgery settings, the carbohydrate load, particularly in the diabetic population, stands to directly affect other important aspects of perioperative care. So, at least 2 studies have been reported on their experience, with one revealing no increased incidence of perioperative hypoglycemia when incorporating an oral carbohydrate load as a part of comprehensive perioperative program. The ERAS cardiac published recommendations are an important first of many important steps towards a comprehensive perioperative strategy to optimize the care of cardiac surgical patients from home to home. So many of these recommendations have sufficient preliminary or retrospective evidence to warrant their inclusion, but require furthermore additional research to properly determine the true nature of their benefits. So although challenging, a large multicentral trial measuring the effect of implementation of these recommendations should be done so that the complexity of such an undertaking will be a barrier. So finally, the point is, in our rush to embrace the principles of enhanced recovery, we must not forget its purpose. The main purpose of these recommendations is patients' surgical experience and the postoperative stay. So the involvement of patient advocates in the program design and implementation and inclusion of patient-centered outcome measures will ensure that our pathways lead in the right direction. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Sujanya. That was a very lucid presentation about the recent guidelines about enhanced recovery following cardiac surgery. So, as we gather from the document, there has been much focus on early extubation using multimodal analgesia pathways, rehabilitation, and carbohydrate loading in the preoperative period to enhance or fast track patients so that their journey through cardiac surgery is quite unremarkable. So,
Yes,
and
sir.
also involvement of patient advocates also to ensure safety of the patient is also advised. So with that, summarizing all the main key findings of the document, I open up the forum for further discussions. Please type in your questions in the chat box, or you can unmute yourself and join in the discussion now. Dr. Prabhu Shankar sir, you like to add to the discussion today?
In deep sternal, even the reopening also predisposes much more increase the incidence of deep sternal wounding infection.
Yes, sir.
Reopenings.
Yeah, re-explorations, which is a
re-exploration.
yes.
But
Well,
also
compared
to keep
compared
it.
to earlier years, although the rate has come down, but
Hmm.
definitely if there is a
Yes.
re-exploration, that will significantly add to the morbidity of the patient. Yes,
Okay.
agree.
Then
So can you enlighten us how is the practice in your institute, sir?
regarding this one, same like whatever some of the surgical conditions where less this one, especially beating heart surgeries and all, we extubate, except if the patients example, if the patients with the PDA coming for closure, if it is severe pH, then you won't extubate on the table or fast tracking like. Later we assess the condition of the LV and the PA pressures, and later we'll extubate. Otherwise we extubate, especially we plan accordingly depending on whatever the madam said, the cross clamping time, this one temperatures, duration of CPB. These are all count for the fast tracking.
Okay.
More the CPB periods and all, we tend to withhold this one for extubation or extubations, and we assess later with the T. If it is everything is suffice, next day will be extubated if the patient is hemodynamically stable.
So
with or without support.
Do you do TE in the post-operative period, sir?
Especially for pediatrics we do.
Oh, I see. Okay.
For adults, any doubts or anything will be done. Otherwise, post-op protocol is only after TTE will be extubated.
Okay.
Transthoracic.
Transthoracic, you mean? Okay. Right. Okay. That's
Otherwise, everything whatever she told is wonderful for the
yes.
not only rehabilitations,
pretty comprehensive discussion. Yes.
Even rehabilitations and all. Definitely it will help. Except we cannot do anything for say emergency conditions.
Yes.
Otherwise, definitely it will help. Can improve the reserve. Just for other this one, rate of cooling and rate of what is the rate of cooling and rate of rewarming to prevent the cognitive or dysfunctions.
Okay. So Saujanya, can you take up the question? Do they mention anything about rewarming? This the rate at which we are rewarming, whether that would affect the cognitive function? Did they discuss?
Rate of rewarming and also rate of cooling also.
All right. Okay.
Yes, sir. In this ERA's recommendation, they have mainly focused on rate of rewarming rather than rate of cooling. Rate of rewarming, it should not be, they didn't mention the ideal time interval at what period should be taken to rewarm per degree centigrade increase in temperature. But they have mentioned that rapid rewarming will definitely cause cognitive deficits which are not temporary and which can't be like addressed post-operatively.
Yes, Kevin, you like to make a comment?
Yeah, it's every for every 1 degree rise in temperature, at least minimally we have to take five minutes. How about you, sir? Especially deep hypothermics up to 18, we take minimum of 2 hours minimum. Means that around that comes around minimum for every 1 degree rise in temperature, we take 5 minutes, minimum 5 minutes.
Yes.
And she also sufficed everything about the glucose control. Though we tend to avoid glucose, but it will definitely helpful for the diabetic patients if we give the load of the carbohydrates pre-operatively, because even the insulin, there's so many other advantages there, like insulin and this one resistance and all may not occur.
Yes. No, so that is something coming up in a positive manner quite recently.
We diabetes, DNS. If you start the DNS, we everybody, hey, patient is diabetic, but needs, because this one. And early, what I suggest is early this one, oral intake. It helps. It has got a better this one. Advantages are more.
Yes, following other than early initiation of oral feeding.
Other than paralytic ileus, there is no need of hesitating. Slowly you can give especially the ice cream and all. That will help a very good calorigenic post-operatively. And it soothes, as we know, she told vasoconstriction and all injures the mucosa, that coats. And JIT, it soothes the stomach and intestine, and it gives lot of calories. What we give is ice cream.
I see. Okay. Yeah. That's a good comment, Dr. Bhaumshakar. Yeah. I guess Dr. Kevin wants to make a comment.
Okay.
Hi, thank you. Thank you. Greetings from my country, Kenya. I'm a proud alumni of NH Narayana. Yeah, I just want to comment about fast track and what I practice here. So I usually do on-table extubations for single valves procedures, especially if the pump time and clamp time was short. For patients who are on double valve and maybe the clamp time was like 3 hours or so, I would maybe like fast track them maybe at least within 2 to at least 6 hours in ICU. So before I extubate, I usually do a PEC 1 block and a serratus anterior block, which even helps with pain control. And congenitals, conditions like an ASD or a PDA, and there was no pulmonary arterial hypertension, those also candidates also extubate on table.
That's wonderful, Kevin. So for all
we discussed.
So Kevin was one of our alumni from Narayana, and he's practicing quite well in Kenya, isn't it, Kevin?
Yeah.
Yes, wonderful. And then, so it's a great pleasure for us to learn about your that you have taken up the many of our practices from here, and you're putting it into practice as well over there, and your experience with using regional blocks, following and using that to fast track cases also quite entertaining. Yes. Other than your PEX block, is there any other blocks that you use to fast track, which you have found useful in your practice?
The serratus anterior muscle block, serratus anterior, to help with pain on the chest drain sites.
Fine, fine. That's good. That's good. So other than regional or pain management, which you're using a very comprehensive strategy for that, are there any of the other fast track modalities that you apply in your practice?
Yeah, we once, like for example, if once we've extubated and we've taken to the ICU, we encourage oral, starting them if they're not, maybe like in 6 hours or so after, or 4 hours after, we encourage some. Initially, we start with drinks like water, and then gradually we move to light diet.
Okay, okay, that's good. That's great. Yes. Right. What about your what's your mobilization strategy?
Yeah, we also do chest physiotherapy. We usually like start it. Okay, we usually like if we begin it, like if a patient is extubated and he's breathing adequately and more alert, we invite the physiotherapists to help with more of like chest with the spirometry.
Okay, that's great. That's
Yeah.
great. Right, right, right. Do you use carbohydrate loading in your practice?
We haven't introduced it yet, but we usually encourage clear liquids like at least 2 hours before surgery. So it's something that we've started in our policy, just allowing our patients to have some clear liquid before surgery.
And what is your incidence of delirium in your practice?
Delirium, okay, I would say before we started using dexmedetomidine, our patients used to get some delirium. But as part of our protocol, as we are extubating and we start them on dexmedetomidine once we have stabilized the patient coming off bypass. So we start an infusion when they are just closing the chest, and by the time they are closing the skin, we turn off our volatile agents and leave the patient on dexmedetomidine. And we found that patients on dexmedetomidine, the incidence of delirium is less as compared to patients who have not been on it.
Wonderful, wonderful, Kevin. That's great. That's good to know about your practice in your area, and it is quite delightful for us to also to realize that you are doing quite well over there. Any of the other attendees would like to contribute to the discussion with their institution's practice, or add on further points that we have not explored in this discussion today? Something that we have missed out, which could make a difference in fast tracking, or any of the points that we should be careful about? Well, I don't see any questions in the chat box. Right. Murli sir?
Yeah, regarding rewarming, there are 3 or 4 points I would like to make. One is when you're rewarming, the gradient between the venous inlet and arterial outlet temperature of the blood, that is venous inlet and arterial outlet of the blood, should never exceed 10 degrees centigrade. This gradient cannot exceed 10 degrees centigrade. That is one first point. Second point is that we should not rewarm the patient to greater than 36 degrees, because the brain temperature is usually 1 degree higher than the body temperature, and hence if you go to 37 degrees, actually brain temperature will be 38, which is cerebral hyperthermia. So to prevent that, which to prevent cerebral hyperthermia, you have to limit the limit of the temperature warming to about 36 degrees centigrade. And because of the redistribution of heat, the body also will get warm to 36 in due course of time. That is second point. Third point is that when we are doing, he was mentioning, Dr. Prabhu was mentioning about deep hypothermic circulatory arrest. What we have learned is that if you vasodilate the patient during cooling and warming, the rate of cooling and warming can be enhanced. So you don't have to really take 2 to 4 hours to cool and 2 to 4 hours to rewarm. What we do is we use Mildredon on initiating bypass, which provides uniform vasodilatation. We are not worried about what happens to the heart in this condition because we are going to arrest the heart. So vasodilatation is has a key role in cooling and rewarming. It can reduce the time spent on bypass in cooling and rewarming the patient. These are 3 points I would like to mention.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. Thank you for those very important points that we have to keep in mind when we are rewarming a patient. Of course, definitely it does contribute to the morbidity of the patient if we do not stick to the basic principles during rewarming.
Yes, what sir told, vasodilator, definitely it has got a very good role. That's what we also do, sir. SNP, we start so SNP during that will help.
Right.
What
we
why
have learned is
tell sir.
What we have learned is Mildredon, we have used it especially in deep hypothermic circulatory arrest. It causes even cooling of all the body parts, especially the deep structures in the brain, and warming also is quite even. And if necessary, you need to have add noradrenaline when you're coming off. If the patient is really vasodilated to such an extent that mean artery pressure is not being able to maintain, you can add norepinephrine at that point of time.
Good, sir. Good.
Right. Wonderful. It's been quite a lively discussion about a new, not a new concept, but something that is progressively becoming more dear to cardiac anesthetists as well as cardiac intensivists in the practice of cardiac anesthesia. Hopefully, in the coming years, we will see more debates on these particular aspects and more insights about how we can fast track patients that are coming under our care.
Yeah.
So there are no more questions in the chat box. Would anybody else like to add to our discussion? Yes, sir. Shall we conclude the session then, sir?
Yes.
So, thank you, sir.
Thank you, and please join us for TE workshop on Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. Don't miss it. It's faculty from all over the world will be there. You can feel free to put your questions in the chat box and enjoy the show. Starting on Friday at 4 p.m. with 3 paper presentations. 5:45 is the inaugural. 6 is the start of the sessions. And on Saturday, we have the Golden Fate and research presentations. On Sunday, we have pro-con session and also fee papers in addition to the didactic sessions. Please don't miss any of this. Thank you so much. Please register. That will be necessary for credit points.
Yes, definitely. It's an academic fiesta with regards to echocardiography in cardiac surgery that we'll be witnessing this weekend. So I request all attendees to register for that one and then attend as well. And with that, we close the session for today. And I thank all the attendees for joining in for the session today. And
sir, 1 minute, sir.
Yes,
I thank Dr. Saujanya for giving us the recent advances regarding the fast tracking. Especially not only fast tracking means not only the extubation, starting from the preparation of the patient for the surgery up to the better outcome. She has enlightened us wonderfully. Thank you, Saujanya, for giving us very good important points.
Thank you, sir.
Yes.
So she has very comprehensively covered all the aspects. So initially we were only under the impression that fast tracking means only extubation within 6 hours, but that is not what actually it is. It is a very comprehensive program that involves many steps, starting from the time before surgery, in the intraoperative period, as well as into the postoperative period. All those measures have to be taken, and it has to combine together. Only then you can have ideal enhanced recovery following cardiac surgery. So, and Saujanya has done a very good job in enlightening all those steps and all those aspects about it. So it's a very good job. Thank you, Saujanya, and thank you all for attending today.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you so much. Bye.